Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And we have Matteo Smerlak with us here from Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Mathematics and the Sciences, the last day of him being affiliated with this wonderful institution that I also am currently affiliated with. Thanks for having time on the last
It's a
day.
pleasure, Ivan. Thank you.
Yeah. And you used to be doing physics, and then you moved into evolutionary mechanisms and theoretical biology. Would that be a good short summary of what of who you are?
No, because I feel I'm still doing physics.
Okay.
I don't think of physics as necessarily being the study of matter, of inanimate matter,
Okay.
but more like an approach to studying phenomena, and one that starts typically from simplifying them, coming up with models that don't necessarily aim to be complete. And that kind of approach has been really fruitful when it comes to studying inanimate matter. But why not take the same approach when it comes to ecosystems? And I'm not the first, of course. You have seen over the years physicists move into all sorts of topics. And they usually bring the same methodology, the same kind of approach. And I don't think that they would think they're not doing physics anymore. And the same applies to me.
I see.
So to me, it's still physics. It's just that historically, physics has been more successful coming up with theories and explanations of simple phenomena like motion, like gravity, like atomic phenomena. But there's nothing inbuilt in the definition of physics that says that if you study anything else, it's no longer physics. So I feel I'm still doing this same kind of physics.
So you're doing it like a Newtonian way, like in Newton times it was called nature philosophy, isn't it? Then a better term for this kind of umbrella approach?
So there's two things, right? So what I just said about physics, I think many physicists will relate to.
Okay.
It's just not limited by the object of study, but more defined by the attitude towards that object.
Okay.
So that's part of what I feel. But then on top of that, I think I'm quite unique in really not feeling too interested or bound by disciplinaries beyond the typical physicist.
Okay.
So natural philosophy sounds great. It sounds old-fashioned. But yeah, I'm curious and I don't mind learning new things. I enjoy that. And as long as I'm given the freedom to do that, I think I'll continue doing that because it's my style. I just am curious of things.
So regarding using the same principles and then applying them to different markets, you had a paper in 2015 about finance and ecosystems. And I did my PhD in finance, so naturally I wanted to talk about this paper, where the basic argument, as far as I understand, but maybe I'm chopping some important details, so correct me.
Yep.
But the basic idea that I got was that you analyzed the ecosystem of financial institutions and how they lend to each other and how they borrow money. And you try to see whether the system is resilient or not, and what are the criteria for it to be resilient under shocks, right? And then you came up with some interesting conclusions. So can you tell about that?
Right. So this was a foray in a field that I did not pursue after that project.
Yeah.
It was part of my stay at the Santa Fe Institute for the Complex Systems Summer School. So this was a project that we had with other people. And yes, at the time, perhaps even more than now, it was a question, what makes financial institutions and financial networks of financial institutions robust? So the 2008 crisis was closer in memory. And so this notion of systemic risk really was top of the agenda for everyone. So that was part of a trend at the time to look at networks of banks.
I would just add that notion of systemic risk is still top of the agenda for everyone in the globe, but it's just moved from finance to everything, basically.
You could say that. Yes, you could say that, certainly. Looking at hard geopolitics a lot more than we used to, for sure. But back then it seemed...
Food supply chains,
certainly.
Yeah, so it's like...
Yeah, everything is interconnected. And for sure. So there, it was part of that conversation. We were curious to look at that. And so we looked at a model where you had banks lending money to each other and they had balance sheets, which was simplified much more than your economist would do. So it was much more...
well, depends on the economist.
Yeah, it was very much econophysics type.
Yeah, okay.
So that's an example of what we were just talking about, where you have physicists simplifying everything and it's different.
And
it's a different approach, and it helps sometimes, for sure. So it was part of that, and the conclusions we found, the criterion for stability had to do with, of course, the number of banks that a bank was typically lending to, the degree in a graph, the degree in a network. Mm-hmm. And what we found was interesting was that formula we got for a condition for stability in terms of the degree was very much analogous to a condition that was discussed previously in a different context. The condition was for the evolution of cooperation on graphs, where instead of having banks lending to one another, you had players on the nodes of a network playing games. So it might have been a prisoner's dilemma. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting analogy, and it was useful to see that you could come up with a semi-analytical result in this case. So this is where we started, was we're going to set up this model, but it's never clear if you're going to be able to say something analytical. Yeah. So you always feel, I'm sure you feel happy and lucky when you can eventually write down a formula that is not just simulations.
Yeah, it's the weirdest form of happiness I ever experienced in my life, I would say, but that's true. Yeah.
But it's a true one, isn't it? Yeah. You come to a place where you understand what does what. You understand causality
It's the definition of Platonic love, I would say. So it's the same feeling that I have. Like, I think that Platonic love is something that mathematicians or physicists can relate to, because when you write a formula, you literally experience Platonic love, because Plato was big on this, numbers being the core essence of things. And so being able to express something in this very abstract language of signs and numbers, and then this elation that you get when you see it.
For sure.
It's very close.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a beautiful way of putting it. You get a sense that you understand something. Yeah. That in that sense, through formulae and mathematics, is really deeper than what you would do if you had a simulation and that was the result of your simulation. It's more like an observation. You can't say that you really truly understand something. Yeah. I feel, at least that's my experience, unless you can write some kind of mathematics. And so if that's what Plato was up to, I think I'm with him. Yeah, for sure.
I think so. But I think it feels like this. It's like, I mean, it's a weird spin-off, but I think that in some sense, this feeling of deep understanding of things is very strongly connected to loving them. Because like, sort of when your closest person does something that you expect them to do in certain situation, and you feel that, I just love this person for being who they are. It's very close with this.
It's very close. But then this raises a question, Ivan, because I don't know if you've experienced this, but by the time you finish writing a paper, you understand the formulae at play, you typically don't like it anymore, don't you? There's always a point where you feel like it's boring because you understand that. And I, anyway, experience some level of, perhaps not disgust, but
I think this has to do with peer pressure and peer review process. I think it doesn't have to do with the formula.
That's part of it.
Whenever I'm looking at the formula, I'm still feeling the same old feeling. Yeah, it's sort of like being in love and getting married. The process of getting married is very exhausting, and most of the people after they just finished organizing everything for the wedding party and it's just finished, they have mixed feelings.
So I worry that that's perhaps what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I got it. But so regarding coming back to this idea of lending and being like basically the level of stability of the network, how it is connected with the way in which the players are interconnected with each other. In the geopolitical level, this is something that I didn't read your paper before I was preparing for this talk, but with this discussion. But if I read before, that would immediately match with this thing that Russia was pushing for ages, saying that we have such a low national debt. Wouldn't it? It's like, I think the same idea coming to the geopolitical space makes a lot of sense. You kind of predict the actors who don't want to be interconnected as the actors who don't want to get in debt, basically.
Right, yes. When it comes to interbank lending, not being too connected is a good thing.
Okay.
Because if you fail, then the risk that you will propagate that failure to other institutions is much lower. So the risk there arises when there's too much interconnectedness with too much leverage. Whether that's the case when it comes to geopolitical relationships,
but it's also
maybe
like
not.
lending between the countries, basically. Like there's national debt, and in a sense, it's lending from country to country. And
the national debt tends to be much more multipartite than countries, I would think. The debt that's being issued by a country is bought by pension funds, by retail investors, by other countries, obviously. So somehow the debt, I think, has multiple layers that aren't simply countries lending to countries. I think that's perhaps a simplification. But it's true that the more interconnected you are, the more you enter in a different regime, certainly, of dynamics. It creates safeguards, it seems to me, but it's also risks. We are seeing both, it seems to me. It sounds like you are interested in talking about the current political situation, and I understand that.
I cannot stop myself from it. But
since we're talking about that, on the one hand, you see the risk that is spreading to countries through their connectedness with Russia and Russian oil and gas supply. And so that's nowadays anyway viewed as a big risk for countries. We are now talking in Germany, and Germany is suffering from that connectedness, and it wants to be more independent. So certainly a source of risk, because if relationships turn sour, then that's a liability. That's a vulnerability. On the other hand, it can create stability. And so I think it's a deeper, there isn't a single answer there. And here I'm thinking of the relationship perhaps between China and the United States, where it is easy to imagine that it would escalate a lot more already at this point if it were not for their interconnected economic interests. They trade a lot and they exchange debt as well a lot. And this means that they have a lot to lose to breaking up relationships and pushing them too far. So you can see that they might have conflicting interests when it comes to the East Asia area, to Taiwan, obviously. So there they clash. However, their trade relationships are so deep that it would hurt them both somehow.
It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma.
It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma, yeah.
I see. Okay. Regarding the global risk structure, let's say, or just resilience to risk, another also research that you were doing on food security research. And this is something that also feels very relevant now. You were doing that in like 2017 or something. It was before COVID, definitely.
It was another project that I started in Santa Fe. So this is a complex system summer school.
I seem to be attracted to your Santa Fe projects.
You seem to be, yes. Yeah. You seem to be. I'm sure, but perhaps the people who are listening may not know. The summer school is a 1-month program, and people come really from all sorts of disciplines, not just within science. You had people in the humanities, and they gather there to learn about complex systems. There are lectures being given, and there are projects, research projects that people do. And so I met the people.
By the way, if you can apply.
It's cool. I mean, I had a wonderful experience there, frankly. Also because the parties were great, and it's in this beautiful, Santa Fe area in New Mexico, which is always sunny. It's the sunniest apparently in the US, certainly, perhaps in the whole of North America. Okay. So have you been, Ivan?
No, I've been in US. In US, on the south of US, I only was in Austin at some point.
Okay.
When going for the conference, but at some point I would like to have a road trip throughout the country just to see the nature mostly. But Santa Fe also sounds nice. I would like to.
It's very cool. Yeah.
At some point go.
So anybody, I think, in terms of their fields, can apply to the Santa Fe Summer School, and it's a month of fun, frankly. So yes, I do encourage people to go. I met a bunch of people there. One of whom is Bapu Vaitla, who is and used to be a food security researcher, and so this is how this food resilience project started. As a discussion of what is resilience and how to quantify it. So he was coming with all these questions coming from his field experience, as well as theoretical debates that they had in that field. And I thought about it a bit. It was really fun, and we came up with a time series kind of approach to resilience. I suggested perhaps resilience has to do with time correlations in a series of some indicator.
Like if there is a shock, what happens afterwards? Like
exactly. Does it decay? Does it decay fast? Does it overshoot somehow? Is there anti-correlation?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what this paper is about.
And there was one of the interesting findings, at least for me, was surprising that volatility in food supply is not obviously connected to the resilience. There are some countries like China, for example, that has very low volatility in food supply, but that you showed to be anti-resilient, anti-correlated to shocks, at least to some extent. So that was interesting because for me,
this was part of the discussion, precisely. So it wasn't clear at the beginning whether you should look at the volatility of supplies or some other measure. And so we decided to write a paper when we convinced ourselves that we should think of both correlation and standard deviation or volatility as complementary but different aspects of that question.
But basically, if the system is anti-correlated, it means that it kind of cannibalizes itself in some sense. Like if you get volatility, if you have a combination of low volatility and anti-correlation, then once you get a shock, then you can it means that the system is very unstable, doesn't it? Because if it's generally working within this range of low volatilities, if something really bad happens like COVID or something that's way out of 3 sigmas in terms of volatility, then you really end up in some situation where you don't even know how it will react, but it will react drastically worse, at least in the short scale. Isn't it the case?
I wouldn't know. It seems to me that it depends really what the baseline, the good outcome is. So there
less people dead.
No, definitely. But you're talking about time series analysis a bit more specifically. So are we talking about a time series that ought to be very stable at a given level, or should it grow?
Okay.
For instance, so it's a different question. Anti-correlation means that when you have a shock in one direction, then you get somehow an opposite shock soon afterwards. Is that a good way to return to an equilibrium that is the desired outcome, or does it somehow spoil the ability to keep growing if that's what's at stake, right? So I wouldn't be able to give you a simple, definite answer as to whether that's good or bad.
But it generally seems to be like when we talk about this, the global risks, let's say, or the biggest problem with risks, of course, are heavy tails.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough data and actually enough mathematics even to deal with some of these rare events.
Right.
And so are there, like, let's say, what can we rely upon when it seems that we have to deal with global scales and a lot of this heavy tail events now, and they're getting a bit more convoluted in a sense that we seem to be in a perfect storm in some sense.
We do.
And so what, let's say, from the point of view of complex systems, what are the things we can rely upon in this situation? Because we seem to be for 400 years we were doing very good science about the things that now don't happen to us. In a sense.
Maybe one way to think about this is in terms of a trade-off between efficiency and resilience. One way to be more resilient is to have multiple pathways. But those multiple pathways typically come with a cost. And so seeking maximal efficiency, I would think in general, will have a cost in terms of resilience to a shock. And so maybe that's one way we should look at this going forward. We expect shocks now that we've seen multiple shocks in a row, perhaps not the worst, maybe worse is to come. I wouldn't be able to know. But this notion that we need more redundancy, multiple pathways seems, I think, valuable. The logistic chains, the supply chains that you mentioned just before, show that if there is one port where just-in-time produced components are being delivered, then that can easily break down. If on the other hand we accept that companies have a bit of stock rather than just-in-time, and we accept that perhaps it comes with a cost, but we can have multiple destination ports or multiple ways, more infrastructure to deliver the goods when that's necessary, then we are more resilient. Germany bought a lot of its gas from Russia because it was optimal.
But not resilient.
But perhaps not resilient. And you can see that they are now rushing to build alternative pathways with offshore and all these other things that they're building now. Tanks that for storage and all that stuff.
LPG terminals and everything.
LPG terminals, exactly.
But like now that we know that resilience is part of the picture,
yes.
Do you think that at some point, do you believe that corporate boards will look at this as an actual viable parameter to evaluate the performance of the company? Because I feel one of the reasons why we didn't have, let's say, resilience on the balance sheet before is that people didn't, of course, people judge a lot of things based on their prior experience.
Yeah.
So, and if something happens with a frequency that's not that high, which is outside of the lifespan of people, then people don't take this into consideration. So how do you think close we are to the situation where this would happen?
Please don't take what I say as expert knowledge, as I've never...
No, it's your belief.
It's my belief, as I've never been on a corporate board. What I can tell you is you see certainly ESG investments growing very fast. They're still small compared to the investment universe, but you see insurance companies, you see institutional investors, banks investing a lot more in ESG, and it, I think, has a lot to do with what we're talking about here. They, at least that's what they say, they value it more because they do believe now that it has a financial cost
and also creates existential risk to some of those businesses in a sense.
Right, exactly. And so perhaps there is a shifting understanding, perhaps it's just marketing. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but they do say a lot more. And I've heard financiers recently talk about this, that it's a real financial risk that they should consider now. It's no longer a story of, washing green your credentials. They worry about risks more and more. And the way they address them is by thinking about social, environmental, good governance. So it seems to me that this is kind of growing. It's an understanding and a perception that is growing in corporate.
But this thing, by the way, that you mentioned, this capability to have multiple pathways. Right. I think in several of your works you refer to this. It's called survival of the flattest, something like this. No.
Okay, so now you're talking about microbial evolution or a viral evolution.
But it's just because that's generally when people talk about evolution, is that everybody knows about survival of the fittest. Evolution is one of the most abused scientific ideas. I feel one of them, quantum and evolution. These are two things that are the most abused by non-experts in using them in a metaphoric way, let's say, claiming that they explain some stuff with them.
For sure,
So I would like to know about this concept of survival of the flattest, because everybody knows about survival of the fittest, and maybe too much.
Maybe too much.
So can you tell more about what is this survival of the flattest? And
right, yes, absolutely. Jumping from fields to field is cool. It's fun. I love it.
But I would like to connect it, because having multiple pathways is exactly that, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. So evolution is the change in populations, how they look, but also how they're made genetically over time through selective pressures, through mutation. Survival of the fittest is the idea that whichever type, be it a microbial type or even a different...
Or a corporation.
Is able to grow the fastest, will eventually dominate. a population, and there is no room for suboptimality in evolution. That is the notion of survival of the fittest. Survival of the flattest is a notion that comes from looking at the evolution of certain types of viruses, RNA viruses in particular, that have very, very high mutation rates. What that means is there is no optimal type because that type is mutationally unstable anyway. And so when a virus with very high replication ability replicates multiple times, that ability tends to be lost because of mutational errors. Mutation rates are so high that nothing optimal can stay over time. And so what ends up being a lot more important for the stability of the species long term is that mutations, when they appear, don't destroy too much of the fitness. And so if you picture the space of possible types of, say, a virus, an RNA virus, as a landscape, with the elevation being replication ability, we call that fitness in evolution, then survival of the fittest would mean that the population would tend to evolve towards the highest peaks in that landscape. But if a peak is very narrow, meaning that whenever you jump off of that particular, you fall off a cliff. If that's the case, and moreover, the species has a very high mutation rate, so it happens a lot, then that may not be optimal. Instead, what may be more optimal and therefore favored over time in evolution is evolving to a region of a landscape that is flatter, may not be as high, may not be as fit, but more robust. And so, yes, in the context of evolution, survival of the flattest is a thing. It has been observed with certain types of RNA viruses, also in sort of computer experiments. And you're right, it's this idea of redundancy.
We kind of need that for societies, in a sense, don't we?
The point of evolution is that you don't decide what evolves, it does by itself.
Okay.
And so if behaviors in companies are not going to be long-term stable because they over-optimize things that may not persist in the future, they will disappear. At least a Darwinian view of evolution is it just happens over time. If it's not able to survive, it dies out. Okay. There's an element of fatalism in Darwinian evolution. We may learn from that story and try and design our institutions better. I grant you that. But the ones that aren't stable will, just by definition,
the disappear. Problem is so that the species stays while some of them collapses. That's isn't this the problem? Like, we are at the scale where we can design such an institution that if it's a wrong one and it collapses, it might create existential risks for the species, so that we don't have a chance to create another one. So
yes, certainly
that's the biggest deal. But like, regarding your survival of the flattest, when we were talking about that, I didn't have this idea, but now I have it. It would be super nice to check that for software. Yeah, because for software, it feels like what you said, this idea that if you do a functional update, it's much better that if it does, it's less, sometimes it's less important that the functionality you introduce is big, multiple, and super useful, but it's much more important that the back compatibility works and you don't crash too much and you don't break a lot of things within your update, especially how the languages, for example, programming languages evolve.
Yes, no, that's a great analogy. You're talking about back compatibility. How about forward compatibility? Meaning, if it takes very special skills to maintain that particular feature, and you're not likely to be able to maintain those skills within the company or as part of the software development team, then maybe it looks great now, but it's not going to stay very long.
Yeah.
And so building a good code base that is easy enough to maintain going forward, even if it's not optimal in terms of some feature that you desire, might be the better option.
But it sounds like an interesting, just an interesting kind of research pursuit to check whether this happens in certain software products or within certain languages as they evolve, I think. So coming back with this, so evolution and Darwinian view on determinism, let's say. Yep. So we've been talking about that with Slava recently, and I wanted to discuss that with you.
Yeah.
So the human brain is such a thing where we store information, right?
Some of us.
Yeah. Good. So and DNA is another place where we store information.
Yeah.
And so what we've been like, one of the intriguing, or for me at least intriguing idea, is that we know that human species kind of changes the environment in which we live, which means that
all
the
species
information
do.
Well, okay, so that let me try to come to the question. So my perception is at least that if you have more capabilities of changing the environment, it allows you to kind of skew the weights between the information in the DNA and the information outside of DNA, so that you kind of propagate through culture the DNA that becomes better within this culture than outside of it. And the thought experiment is that, like, if modern human goes back 200,000 years, and just as he or she or they are, and comes into this lifetime, they would probably not survive. However, if you take the same aged human from there to our times, they will. So it seems that there's an interesting, maybe even conflict between the information stored in the DNA and information stored outside of it through culture and education, where we change the landscape. We kind of redefine what is optimal.
Yes, no, certainly. So you have eco-evolutionary feedbacks all across the living world. It's not, I think, unique to humans, but you're right that.
But we kind of can do it directionally. That's like we
directionally, or perhaps intentionally.
Yeah,
is what you have in mind.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. Although it seems that at least at first sight, our ability to design medicine in particular means that the pressures of natural selection are really not so strong as they used to be. So if we can cure ourselves and vaccinate ourselves, and then what just channels into the DNA is unclear. It seems that at least on some level, selective pressures have become a lot weaker. And so maybe what is happening really is that cultural evolution is the dominant mode of evolution at this point. But let's keep in mind also the timescales that are relevant here.
But like one of the things that was, so if talking about cultural revolution, surprise, in the last half a year I've been thinking a lot about fascism and reading a lot about fascism, and it seems a very weird coincidence that what the ideas that they propagate are kind of pro DNA outside and against culture. So it seems
Tell me more. How is it pro DNA?
Like fascist ideology was based on the idea that we need to choose DNA and propagate kind of to serve DNA based ideas rather than culture propagated ideas. It caused an enormous disruption and a lot of grievance and so on. It was trying to kind of move to stop evolving in the direction where the culture points the evolution, but kind of coming back into the DNA direction.
Okay.
And it seemed to be causing a huge disruption and a lot of grievance. It's just intriguing, the fact that this so like cultural evolution is very important to preserve and stay and kind of
yes. I think if you look at fascist versions of eugenism, well,
they also were not some of them were not very good at science. That's also clear.
No, but I mean, I was going to say that's true,
which is lucky for what coincidence.
Yeah, I was going to say it was very much self-interested. I mean, they happened to design their versions of optimal evolution in terms of being directed towards what they looked like somehow, and so it was really more of a pretext of sort of it was a form of racism, and they declared somehow one race to be.
Yeah, but this was exactly the case where surviving of the flattest won over survival of the fittest within the culture. So cultures that propagated, well, like modern inclusive culture is the culture based on the idea of survival of the flattest, in a sense, right? Everybody's inclusive. You can do you, and it seems to be resilient and wins over this.
That's perhaps one aspect
idea
of it. I mean, the way we value diversity in certain societies also, I think, has to do with how creative it makes that society.
The notion which gives more paths to
yes.
go.
And so if you wanted a biological analogy to that, it would be something like increasing the rate of mutations. The rate of novelty in a society would be increased, or so the theory goes, if you bring together people that have different experiences and different ways of life. So diversity as a, like you say, as opening new pathways and just being able to catalyze interesting, useful novelty. So, and this is certainly not something that was part of fascist thinking. They weren't so interested in novelty because they felt, it seems, that they had figured it all out. The way to be optimal was to sort of either be embraced in one particular physiological type, cultural type, or just really be left out.
Just for me, this was a huge insight in a sense that I always intuitively felt that diversity helps to some extent. But talking at the moment with some people who I would say are fascists, unfortunately, it was kind of difficult to come up with a logical, let's say, mathematically rooted explanation of why a diverse system would be preferential towards this highly optimized system. And when I got this idea about survival of the fittest and this idea about the multiple pathways and resilience, this is where I'm like, oh, there's mathematics behind it, which actually shows that it's beneficial. Which is a nice argument to have.
It's a nice argument to have. You want to take it with a grain of salt, of course, because the assumptions that make the mathematical argument work in one context might not be meaningful in another context. So
it's more not that their arguments are super mathematically grounded in universe.
Good.
Right? So
good. So, but you can take inspiration certainly from that line of research, be it like you say, viral evolution, the robustness to mutations and mutational effects, or other fields, certainly systemic risks. All these do show that there is indeed a trade-off oftentimes between optimality in the narrow short-term sense and the ability to evolve long-term and be sustainable.
Yeah.
So you can, I think you are quite right to draw from that knowledge and that understanding to make a case for diversity. But it's a case. It's an argument.
One of the examples that I came across thinking about that was Athens and Sparta. So there was a huge war, Peloponnesian Wars. We know about it in details. And Sparta was basically dictatorial, militaristic society. And Athens were surprised, very democratic, coined the idea of this democracy thing we still practice and all that. And I heard about it on the background, but then I read a bit more about it, and it's like Spartans actually won. They conquered Athens. But more than 2,000 years after, Athens are still the capital of a huge country. We know a lot about Athenian culture, science, whatnot. And they are still the center of trade, and merchants come and go. And they were the center of trade after they lost. And historians argue where Sparta actually was.
Is that so?
Yes.
I had no idea.
It's like they kind of know where it was, but there's some, it's not very clear. And this is, I think, a beautiful story about this thing also, that like short term, you can win, but is it worth it? It's like...
and what vulnerabilities do you create along the way?
Because the resilient structure stays resilient even if you kind of draw a point. Like, okay, you made a point. Now what?
Yeah.
That's interesting. So coming back to this long-term dynamics and evolution, we've been talking about that with Guillermo in a podcast about chemistry, that he was saying something that I never thought of, but it's fascinating. It's like we have certain chemistry because we are path dependent. It's like we inherit the knowledge from previous generation and so on and so on and so on. So we open the possibilities of certain molecular structures.
Yes.
And we don't know which are out there and which are possible. And there's a multitude of them. But then as we open those structures, we form some materials out of them and so on and so on and so on. So the society is also path dependent. to a large extent because we have the preconceived knowledge. So within this evolution of science space, are there some, I don't know, interesting directions or intriguing ideas about how science evolves? Because those scientific ideas show some evolutionary patterns to you, and can evolution tell us something about science or educate us in which direction it goes and so on?
It's an interesting question. I think on the surface, at least, they are similar. They are fueled by novelty. Mm-hmm. That's the key point about evolution. So let me pause here perhaps for a second. Sure. We know Darwin, especially for this sentence, which is so famous, the survival of the fittest. But if you really actually do read the book, The Origin of Species, what he talks about...
Nobody will do that.
No, but I can tell them what they'll find.
Okay.
And so what they'll find is, more than natural selection, what the book is about is the origin of novelty in nature. And it's really a painstakingly detailed report of evidence that, in fact, there is innovation in nature, and that it's sometimes beneficial and sometimes not. And that's the thing that's really wasn't clear at the time. It was easy to imagine that if something is better, it's going to dominate. That wasn't really the breakthrough. The breakthrough was to show that, in fact, living types produce novelty all the time. And it's on the basis of that novelty that natural selection can act and propel evolution forward. So
novelty is the engine, in a sense. It's like this is something that gives the selection to select out.
I would say it's the fuel. It's the thing that really exactly gives something selection to select. And whether there is enough of it to propel evolution or there isn't is really fundamental and drives the rate of evolution. And so that's why in evolutionary dynamics, we worry about mutation rates a lot. It changes everything if we have high mutation rates or low mutation rates. And the survival of the flattest you were talking about before is really a regime that you would expect, as I said, in a high mutation rate regime. So going back to questions of science and society, there is the question of the ability of the scientific institution to select and promote the best ideas. And this we take care of through reputation, through awards and prizes. The Nobel Prize, what is that if not a selection mechanism? It's a way to put the focus on one result, one breakthrough, and say that is really what everyone should be thinking about because it's so important. So it's a selection mechanism. But equally important is, again, the origin of novelty. And so you need both some sort of selection so that it's not just random drift, it's not just, as well as feeding that selection pressure with as much novelty as possible. And so I think science and knowledge generally tend to progress through that combination of factors. It is Darwinian in that sense. And again, I emphasize that Darwinian shouldn't mean it selects strongly, selection of the fittest, survival of the fittest. It means that this operates on constantly incoming innovations and creations. In nature, it comes through replication errors, through mutations, also through mutations that are exogenous, that come from, I don't know, UV light, and so on. But you see that in order to be resilient and continue to be able to adapt to new circumstances, nature has put himself in a state where it is not, in fact, static. It keeps changing. Mutation rates haven't evolved down to zero. And so it's really important. It is able to produce new ideas and new forms, and so should we as a society, and particularly in science. So the Nobel Prize is important because it provides selection, but the ability to acknowledge that something that sounds weird and strange is worth pursuing up to a point is equally important. And when you have these two things together, I think you're in a good shape to keep making progress.
Yeah. So, but then we come back in a sense to this notion of short-term and long-term optimality. Yep. In a sense that if we are running against a clock, let it be, I don't know, the clock of a sun system or the clock of global warming or whichever other clock, then there are certain scientific probably there are some areas of scientific knowledge that are kind of far apart from where we are now, and we have limited time to get there, in a sense. But it would be very nice to get there at some point. So can we do as a society something about that, or like as a species something about that regarding scientific? Are there some ideas, evolutionary ideas, or any other ideas of like how can we organize or drift into the direction, in some sense, faster in the direction where we want to get? Let's say, food security is one of the things that seems to be an important direction, overall area of applications, let's say, where we want to have some expert knowledge fast. Energy seems to be like we probably want to have high energy global society, and then the faster we get there, the better, because it seems that if the longer it takes us, the more CO2 we produce, for example, because until we get high energy cheaply, we have to burn stuff.
Yeah.
And so what about that? Could there be some global initiatives or some general? Can we, let's say, make some educated guesses on how to get faster into these critical areas of scientific knowledge, or not?
There is multiple answers to that question.
Go for
Clearly, from enabling more people to have access to good education, to be exposed to the scientific
method. Which would kind of crank up the novelty. Right?
Yeah. Something else for novelty is recombination. So you will notice in nature that many species are sexual. And what sexual reproduction does is it brings about recombination of genomes. And that is, you take a bit of the one and a bit of the other, and you bring them together arbitrarily, and maybe that's new. Okay, so the rate of recombination, I've talked about mutation so far, but recombination is also quite important in sexual reproduction, and that is something that I think can be inspiring also in how we manage our societies and science in particular. Recombination is when people talk to one another and explain their ideas so that they can be brought together. And I think,
and this is how you get this interdisciplinary research, for example.
Interdisciplinary is one thing.
Idea from physics and then you bring it somewhere. And
certainly, but I would say there is still a lot a long way to go in terms of our scientific institutions to increase that rate of recombination. The way journals are set up at the moment doesn't necessarily help. It's not open enough, in my view. So the scientific communication process, the scholarly communication process is not open enough. You don't easily have access to research that is not published yet, for instance. That's one thing. You still have many labs and many researchers that are loath to talking about what they're doing before it's out there for fear that somebody steals it. So just in the same way as intellectual property can stifle innovation in the private sector, I think something like intellectual property in academia is in the way. So I would really wish to see a lot more openness for the purpose of bringing about better recombination, more recombination, and perhaps faster evolution. So that's one level to address the question you asked. But you were talking about specific sort of examples. Improve our energy systems, food systems, and so on. And there I would think an obvious answer is we should invest public money a lot more into basic research in these domains.
You wrote a paper about that. I think it's high time you...
Right, yes, I'm happy to talk about that too. So Carlo Rovelli, my former PhD advisor, and I have promoted an idea that goes as follows, really, when it comes to global risks, climate change, you've talked about it, pandemics, we are clearly underinvesting in preparedness, in mitigation, in finding solutions, generally speaking. Those are global risks that really go beyond any one country. So there is a need for more money, clearly. And whenever there is a COP conference, you see that there is widespread agreement that more money is needed. But the problem is where to find that money, and you have a lot of finger pointing between the emerging countries that are really emitting a lot of CO2 today, but historically haven't done so much, versus the West, which is really doing better. The trends are good, but historically have emitted so much. So you see that finger pointing. So that's happening on the one hand. You have these global risks, you have a lack of investment. On the other hand, at the same time, you see a dramatic increase in military spending globally. Of course, this is happening right now that there is this war in Ukraine. But even previously, you had seen between 2000 and 2020 a doubling of global military spending after correcting for inflation. That is really a lot of money that's being spent. So
that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I want everyone to pause here to think about how much money that is. The world globally spent $1 trillion in 2000 per year on military. Today, it's over 2 trillion. So not even talking about the absolute numbers, but the fact that we have...
It's adjusted to inflation.
Adjusted to inflation, yes. That we have allowed the spending to double in that time means that we are spending 1 trillion extra than we used to in the year 2000.
What about the global GDP?
It has increased as well.
Yeah, but not 2 times.
No. If you compare to GDP, you see that these figures are stable, maybe even decrease in per GDP. But if we produce more cars and hospitals, do we need more tanks necessarily? So the fact that GDP increases shouldn't be a baseline.
Yeah,
GDP shouldn't be a baseline for military spending.
But as far as I understand, most of the increase of GDP happens in these up-and-coming countries where maybe before they just couldn't afford one tank and now they can, so they buy it. So
military spending is really vastly dominated by U.S. spending.
Oh, okay. Just big countries, basically.
Big countries, and particularly the U.S., which spends almost half of what the world spends every year on their militaries. Okay. It's just 300 million people, but they spend half of what the world spends on their military. So that has to be kept in mind. And they have increased their spending quite a bit, which explains the global trend. So what happened really was you had 9/11 and then the war on terror, and the war on terror cost a lot. And so they spent and spent and spent billions and billions. So there is this situation. We are now increasing military spending even more, and we are still underinvesting in threats that are equally or perhaps a lot more, I would say, real than military threats. So what should we do about this? Is there a way out? Obviously, the solution is to try and bring some of that funding back to the climate emergencies and pandemic agencies.
Where it belongs, basically.
Yeah, but you have difficulties, obviously. One of which is the strength of the lobbying that goes on around the military industrial sector. It's good to know that in the US, for instance, if we're talking about the US, the top 5 military contractors pay an estimated 800 lobbyists full-time. And that is, of course, more than the number of congresspeople that there are and senators together. So there's more than one lobbyist per representative and senator in the United States that's being paid full-time by the top 5 military contractors. So that's something that you need to know. Clearly, this is skewing the discussion in a direction that may not be in the greater good or for better.
In Russia, they solved this problem by merging military with the state.
Yeah,
it's very efficient.
Right. Yes, it's a different approach. So that's one reason why we see so much spending and increasing spending, because there are special interests there. But there is another deeper reason that is something like a prisoner's dilemma, a social dilemma, and that's that you have multiple actors that fail to coordinate and cooperate. If you look at the problem from the perspective of just one state, the way heads of states do or governments do, they see themselves on an international stage with adversaries. And those adversaries increase their spending, and so they conclude that unless they are ready to pay a security cost, they must too. But then what that does, of course, is that the adversaries seize the razor.
It's a feedback loop, basically.
It's a feedback loop, and it takes us to a place where none of the actors has better security, but all are spending more of their resources.
Actually, probably everybody has worse than security now.
You could argue that way for sure. If you look at,
because you can kill more people fast.
Can kill more people fast, and you signal that you are indeed threatening to your adversaries. Yeah. That's how they see it. That's how Russia has seen the massive increase in Western spending, and vice versa in China. So what you're signaling, instead of goodwill and the desire to find common solutions, you're signaling that you might be, in fact, planning to create more trouble.
Yeah.
So it does it does create challenges to global security. So we pay an extra trillion compared to the year 2000 because of these two mechanisms. And an extra trillion per year is really massive. It is 5 times more than total foreign aid, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
It is
so total foreign aid is like 200 billion per year, something like that.
200 billion per year on that, and that includes private and public aid. So we spent 5 times more than total foreign aid on top of what we already spent in the year 2000 on the military. Yeah. So these are really massive numbers. Or it's also, if you would do a sort of quick back of the envelope calculation, 1 trillion is the capital expenditure to add 2 terawatts of solar energy to the global system, which is about 10% of human consumption of energy. So the waste compared to year 2000 is really massive and enormous. Yes. And I've said what I think the causes of this are. Now, the lobbying problem is one that can only be solved through transparency. The coordination problem, the social dilemma, it's called the security dilemma in the field, can be solved through international cooperation, through negotiations. So to get to our idea, Carlos and mine, is we should try to create a new cycle of international negotiations where countries would come together to negotiate targets for military spending. One option, what we propose, is that they would look at reducing their military spending by 2% per year together in a coordinated manner, in a way that does not jeopardize the balance of power. And if they do, in just about 5 years, you are unlocking about $1 trillion again, which is why we sometimes call this a trillion treaty. Because you are saving what looks like a little, but it's the amounts are so big that you get to these numbers. Now,
also 2% of a very big number is still a very big number.
Is a very big number, definitely. And 2% is how much the military budgets change year to year anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not
it's just the direction.
It's just the direction, yes. And we are not lobbying any one government or any one country to do it by themselves because of the security dilemma. But it should be possible to negotiate this in a sort of global multilateral manner. If that happens, we suggest that half the savings are allocated to a global fund to invest in climate solutions, in pandemics, preparedness, and so forth.
Resilience fund, kind of.
That's right, a resilience fund, exactly. The other half, we suggest, could be used by governments in whichever way they like, discretionary, perhaps to help convert the R&D capacities of the military sector that are strong in some countries to look at other projects, perhaps to just give away to lobbyists. But in whichever way is relevant, this is free money for governments that they are not spending on their military, so they can use for other purposes. And half goes to a global fund that should be administered in a multilateral way. There are already existing institutions, already existing global funds. They're way small. And what we suggest would create a global fund, or perhaps just bring more resources to the existing funds on a scale that is an order of magnitude more. And so we sometimes call this idea a global peace dividend. It is by acknowledging that cooperation can bring benefits, we open an avenue for finding solutions and sort of upscaling dramatically our capacities in R&D for climate and so on and so forth. So that's the idea. We've talked about it to a bunch of people. 55 Nobel Prizes have signed on to this. So this was what we sort of threw to the media back in December last year, as it's an appeal by Nobel scientists from around the world with this goal of establishing a treaty eventually on military spending in climate and pandemics finance. And lots of individual people have joined our appeal. There is a petition online that people can sign.
So we'll put a link.
Yeah, great. So that's the plan. It sounds, on the face of it, it doesn't sound new because you've heard campaigns to reduce military spending, certainly in your country, whichever your country is. But this one aims to...
not in mine.
Perhaps...
Sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't stop myself from making a joke out of it, but yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sure that some brave people have talked about it.
Yes, there
as well.
But of course, at some point of history, yes, but not recently.
But so what people need to understand, and the difference with previous campaigns, is we are not asking anyone to disarm. We are asking countries to negotiate a schedule of disarmament that is common. Yeah. And so if you go and tell countries in the West, go and disarm, they will immediately point at China, Russia, say, look at these threats. It's not possible. You're nice.
Yeah, you have to do it together.
You have to do it together. Yeah. And the point is, you don't need to be friends to cooperate. It can be in our...
It kind of helps, though.
No, for sure. But it's not necessary.
Yeah.
You look at the treaties that were achieved in the 70s and 80s and 90s between the USSR then and the USA on nuclear weapons, for instance. Disarmament has been massive. In fact, the number of nuclear warheads was divided by a factor of 6 or 7 or 8 in 20 years. So massive progress between countries that at the time were absolutely not friends. They were certainly adversaries, but they just realized that they were draining their own resources for no good purpose, except that taking a step unilaterally was viewed as a security cost. And so they managed to find a schedule to do it together without creating security threats that are new, because if you reduce and I reduce and we manage to do it at sort of in a coordinated manner, then we're still in the same place, but we save so much of our resources. So that is what we're talking about in the context of global military spending.
Let's hope that happens. Sounds like a very good idea. And I think it's the best way to finish what we started today. Thank you very much for finding time. It was very nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Ivan. It was so much fun.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching or listening. You can listen to us anywhere you listen to your podcasts. You can also see us on YouTube, and we need your help there. If you're already on YouTube, just share that thing and click some stuff down the video. It helps for more good people to see the video. And if you're not on Facebook, if you're listening to us, at some point, go over to our Facebook page and please do just what I explained earlier. Click like and share so that more people can hear and listen and maybe even see us if they choose to so. Thank you very much, and see you next week.